When you look at the alcohol industry fighting hemp and cannabis, and then you look at the cannabis industry fighting hemp, I think we all need to get along and work together, and we're going to be far better off in the long run if we're all on the same page and not jealous about what the other one has that we don't and we want to get. We should get it the same way that I have to compete with Total Wine.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to High Touch with Jake and Duffy, where we talk about all things hospitality, experiential retail, and quite often cannabis, one of the most interesting bleeding edge retail spaces out there today. Today, we are talking to someone who's managed to turn one of the most traditional categories, liquor retail, into something that feels really modern, really experiential, really innovative, and surprisingly human. We've got Jon Halper with us on the podcast today. He's the CEO and owner of Top 10 Liquors, a Minnesota-based chain that's grown from 4 stores to more than a dozen under his leadership. Jon's path is pretty unconventional, from corporate law in New York to merchandising at Target to now running one of the most innovative independent beverage businesses in the country. And he's really proof that when you mix hospitality and retail strategy and that willingness to experiment, a liquor store or any really classic retail environment can actually become something more, can become a cultural experience, can become a hub for people to try something new and to grow from that experience. So welcome, Jon, to the podcast.
Thank you. Not sure I am deserving of all that, but it's fun to hear it nonetheless, and pleasure to be here today.
Jon, I heard on another kind of pod interview that you did, Jon, that you said you went from one bar to another, from the legal bar to the liquor bar. I like that line, kind of some
Sure.
origin stories there. I'm curious, from your perspective, did that feel like kind of a calling or maybe a rebellion?
It didn't happen quite in that fluid of emotion. I sort of went from being a lawyer to entering the retail realm and working my way around retail. And it was an amazing journey. Kind of had the opportunity uniquely to work my way through legal, real estate, store operations, merchandising, heavily involved in marketing, sales, all of it. So that when I got into owning my own retail chain, I sort of had a lot of the core elements to hopefully be successful. So eventually, yes, it was going from one bar to another, and I'm far happier at the bar I'm at now. But it wasn't quite as intentional as that, nor as quick or fluid as maybe that sounds like.
We love to retell those stories in retrospect as a
But you
real
could
hero's
also say
journey.
that you could say that I've gone from weeding the garden to selling weed too, if you want. So
Oh,
there
all
you
I
go.
like
right.
that.
I like
Although
that
my
one
wife would
too.
tell you I've never weeded a garden in my life, so I'm not sure that works.
Well, it may not have been such a smooth path immediately from the law into liquor, but it must have been a pretty intentional process of actually going in and acquiring the top 10 liquors business in 2013. There were 4 stores. I wouldn't say that from the outside looking in, that would have jumped out to me as the really remarkable business that I want to jump into. What was it that you saw that others didn't? And what did you really plan to do with Top 10 when you jumped into that process?
At the time, there was a lot going on in Minnesota. I won't say that I was looking to get into the liquor store business. I was looking for a retail business to get into. And at the time, I was working with a business broker, and he happened to have a listing of not just 4 stores, but 2 or 4 amazing stores in the Twin Cities. And I I invested in getting to know the owner, really building a relationship, sort of a little bit old school way of putting the deal together. And I also, in the back of my mind, had to deal with the fact that Total Wine was just coming to Minnesota. So I was buying this small chain of stores, but at the time when, Total Wine was going to be here, and, if you know much about them, how aggressive they are and everything, we all knew that it would upend the market. So my entrance to the market was right as Total came to the world. So it was interesting timing and not a lot of time to learn the business, but more requiring immediately leveraging sort of a fundamental retail background to figure out how to succeed.
Do you think that more outsider perspective where you didn't really have time to learn how liquor business is done was beneficial to you in trying things differently that maybe other businesses weren't trying?
Yeah, I definitely do. Innovation, creativity, things like that in an industry that really was not known for that. But if you go back to 2013 in Minnesota, pre-Total Wine, you had a small handful of discount liquor store chains, but many stores, including the 4 that I purchased, were full price liquor stores. And the joke amongst the owners was, they would all get together at a baseball game or whatever and joke about who could raise prices the most. And here Total Wine comes to town, and they traditionally sell national brands a little bit over cost, and then their model is based on getting you to buy their private label. But from a ad perspective, they're advertising effectively at cost all these national brands. So you take La Marca, and they may have been at $11.99, and full price liquor stores were at like $17.99, and that was for one bottle. And that was across the board for virtually every item in the assortment. So for many liquor stores, it completely upended their way of operating and doing business, and a lot of them struggled to figure it out or even think about how to handle it. And I do think that I came from a world that was more promotional driven and competitively driven. So I think I was wired in a way to, come out punching and not just roll over and take what was being thrown at us at the time.
Totally. Yeah, I get the sense that kind of your vision for Top 10 was as much of a hospitality play as a retail one, and you're trying to reimagine that whole experience. What were some of those kind of first small details that you changed to make it feel different on day one?
Interesting perspective, Jake, on that. And one of the first things, and this is true across retail, but it's about the team and having the right people on the team. And I think Top 10, it was called Northgate Liquor back then, but they were known for having a friendly staff, which was a good building block. And they had, the focus of their customer service was carrying out, short checkout lanes and carrying out, kind of a grocery type of mentality. But, back in the age when nobody was really competing on price, they were competing on sort of a quick serve mentality, and it served them well. But all of a sudden, when price was an issue, and frankly, meaningful service was an issue, we had to evolve, and we had to quickly come up with a pricing model to be more competitive in the market. And I can talk about that a little bit. But we also had to focus on building a staff that service wasn't just based on quick checkout lines and carrying out, but being able to actually tell somebody, what do you want to have with turkey for Thanksgiving? What wine should you be drinking? Or I'm making a margarita. What's the best ingredients to put in it? Or what cherries should be going in my Manhattan, or whatever it is. And so you needed a staff that was equipped to be able to do that, to compete with what Total Wine in the market was evolving towards. So we had to focus on evolving our service model, which has not been easy. We've stayed consistent in our effort to get there, but we've had to rewire a system. And 12 years later, there's still days that I scratch my head and be like, it's not about having a short line. It's about providing quality service. And it still doesn't always translate through, but largely we've been able to transition to a really sound service model within the team. As far as the pricing side of it, one of the first things we did was create a loyalty program. And originally, we thought we were losing business for big holiday events and big parties. So we sort of came up with this mentality where you got 20% off wine, 10% off spirits or beer, which is our employee discount, and you would earn points and get coupons to be able to, get that discount. And we also did a little bit of what we called rewards pricing. Today we call it club pricing, where for people that gave us their email and signed up, they would get a little bigger discount than normal retail in our stores. And it never was driven by the coupon or the employee discount. Our club program was really driven by having this special pricing model for people that joined the club. And really took off, and it became the focus of really our entire pricing structure. We don't drive it through a sale mentality like a lot of retail. We have fairly consistent day in, day out club pricing that is market competitive, as long as you sign up for free to join our club. And today we have over 150,000 members, and it's really driving force behind our business.
Absolutely. I mean, that sounds like an incredible strategy from a pricing perspective, and I do want to circle back to that. But before we move past it, I think the employee piece is something that I want to drill down a little bit more into, because that is, honestly a unique perspective around how to think about scaling a business. Most people, I think, when they think, oh, we have to scale this business, they think, oh, we are going to focus more on the bottom line, the economies of scale. We're going to think more about that kind of supply side, supply chain, operational side of the business and what we can benefit from in the efficiencies there versus, it sounds like for you going from, 4 to 12, 13, 14 stores at this point,
15 today and number 16 coming next year.
15 and 16, we can't keep up. The scaling that team to what now I assume is, hundreds of employees, and maintaining a really friendly, consistent frontline experience where people are capable of providing that consultative, high quality, friendly conversation. That sounds really hard to me. And I'm curious how you thought about finding those people, recruiting those people, training those people, empowering them, and keeping that culture as you scale, because that feels like something a lot of businesses have struggled with.
Well, and you're not even talking about the, maybe it's a little easier to hire now, but for 5-6 years time there were really labor shortages as well, and pressures for fair earnings for employees, and lots of things that put pressure on the labor model, and heavy turnover and everything like that. And we've adopted core values as a business, and we didn't do it for a while, but the more we lean into those core values, it defines us as an organization. It helps be a guiding principle for us directionally where we want to go. And, when you're recruiting people and you inspire them by sharing your values, but you also use those values to make a hiring decision on somebody, it does help you raise the bar. And, just this year, every year we do a leadership offsite and we spend a few days sort of going through everything. And, this year, our real focus was taking our hiring and employee standards to a next level and really trying to take advantage of a little healthier labor market to start focusing on really trying to build an A team of players so that, we're able to hit the service levels in stores that we want. Friendly, outgoing, social people, but also have that base knowledge on product to be able to help people. Or more important, you might not need to know every wine, but you need to know how to figure out the right wine for somebody. And there's a lot of sources people can use, from, being in touch with one of our other employees that's an expert in that area, to, ChatGPT is really amazing as far as recommendations on product and other stuff. So there's a lot of resources, and training the team to use those also can help overcome, challenging questions you get regularly from customers.
Yeah. Have you deployed any kind of field tech to your team to, like ChatGPT to be able to answer some of those questions, right at that point of transaction?
More in an informal sense, it's, I think, one of the harder dilemmas for a business, particularly a retailer like us, is how to take advantage of AI technology. Because when you look at the very large players like, Walmart, Target, or I would speculate Total Wine, they'll build that into their infrastructure. And, we're already starting to see, Amazon, Target, others doing layoffs. And a lot of it is tied to, they're succeeding at leveraging that AI technology. I have a vision long term about where I'd like to go with it and how I'd like it to impact the business. But it's a much harder roadmap for a retailer our size to figure out how to leverage the resources to successfully do it. But, if you think about just replenishment of product in stores, AI technology can dynamically look at practically an unlimited number of variables and data to make replenishment efficient and maximize the timing and minimize our inventory commitment in the category. So we can have better product in stores, hopefully better pricing because we're leveraging deals that are available to us, and not overbuy, have a better supply chain flow, which is hard to do. But it's hard to know the path to get to the right resources to be able to do it. And that'll be a major focus of us heading into 2026.
Yeah, and I think there's an interesting dichotomy there, and maybe we don't actually see it as a dichotomy, but the world in which these self-service advisory tools like a chat GPT exist and people can be guiding themselves to a particular purchase, theoretically could run counter to that world in which we're providing a really friendly consultative in-store experience. And I guess I'm curious how you see that evolving for a business like yours. Do you think that in-store experience is going to continue to be equally as important in terms of advising people on their purchases and what they're thinking about buying? Or do you think that will shift as people, start to use tools like that?
It's a great question. I mean, look at the whole book model as an example. And, Amazon completely changed how we buy books, how we read books, everything about the category. Yet there's still this connection to go into a bookstore and walk over and hold the book and look at it and open it and skim it and everything else. And, for those of us that read a lot, I do read on my Kindle, but going into a bookstore is just this special experience. And so I think what we've seen is there's a commodity element where people use e-commerce for delivery, or said differently, sort of an AI mode of service could probably feed that in. But talking to a person when you go into, I'd call us an adult beverage store today rather than a liquor store, but when you go into a liquor store, you can use it on your own and not have to talk to anybody. But there's something about when, our wine lead says, I have been drinking Whitehaven for years. I've always enjoyed it. But I tried Horologist and I actually find the flavors better and it's a little bit more affordable. It's that personal recommendation that AI just can't do. And, you always question, is somebody paying AI to generate that result? They have mistakes. It's never actually tasted a product. It's just reading all the data and sort of compiling it for a recommendation. So I think when you get to that service level in our stores, it's a tool to help our staff do better. It's a tool for our customers to educate, but I don't think you're going to replace the service level you get from an employee. Now, I hope we get to where it's replenishing. I hope we eventually get to where receiving, even through robotic technologies, putting product away. And so there'll be an evolution in staffing, I'm sure, over time. But I don't think we're ever replacing a woman or a man on the floor making a recommendation to buy a product, hopefully with a smile and laughing and having a good time with the customer at the same time.
Well said. Sounds like a bright future to me.
Unless you're the stock guy in the store that may be out of a job. But
Fair point.
So we got the people component, we got the pricing component. We touched on that a little bit earlier, promotions, right? I've read a little bit about your Sunday specials and kind of how legendary they've become in the state. There's obviously kind of a fine line between a promotion and a gimmick. So I'd love to hear about the design philosophy behind these promotions and how you think about building promotion and loyalty that really kind of builds excitement and trust rather than devalues or cheapens the brand or the products.
That's a constant battle at retail is, you want to promote, you want to drive people into the stores, but you don't want to tarnish the brand you're selling or your brand by being overly promotional. And so it is a constant effort to work your way through it. I think the more you can have consistent pricing rather than high-low, I think it definitely helps lead to success. If you go look at a Kohl's or a JCPenney, at least historically, they had this high-low strategy where you'd come in and an item would be, $19.99, but that week you could buy it for $9.99. And, you're probably not getting it half off. They probably engineered the pricing to be able to get there. And so, having price credibility is important. And I think the consistency in that pricing matters. Our major promotional is we do a weekly ad where, ads are more driven to bring traffic into the stores to create an opportunity for our staff to sell than simply to sell those items that are in the ad. So you would be more promotional to bring people in, and hopefully they buy the items. We support the items that are in the ad, but it gives our staff the chance to build a basket, build a relationship with the customer, and sell more to them. The Sunday specials have always been an interesting promotion for us because it was 8 or 9 years ago when Minnesota changed the law. We weren't allowed to sell alcohol on Sundays, and they changed the law. And a lot of retail felt like, oh, we're just going to take 6 days of business and divide it among 7 days, and it's going to be more expensive, and there's no reason we should be doing it. And I supported it because I want to meet our customers where they are, and people want to shop on Sundays. It's a day they don't have to go to work. They can do it casually. They don't want to have to only go after work when they're rushed. So it was a good opportunity. So we decided that we wanted to win the day. And the way to win the day is, what are we going to do to get somebody sitting at home that was not going to go to the store that day to get out of their couch or off out of their chair and come into the store? So we started doing in each category these outrageously aggressive prices, so that if you're sitting at home and all of a sudden you see, wait a second, I can buy Coors Light $5 less than I could normally buy it, or I can buy Tito's for, a massive deal off normally what I would. I'm literally going to get in my car and go take advantage because it's such a great deal. And so we tried to win Sundays by doing that. And I would say it's been one of the more, it's probably one of the 3 most successful things we've done from a marketing perspective since it started. And Sundays are big days for us. We've been rewarded by, first of all, they don't just buy that item. They're filling their baskets with other stuff once they're there. And, brands want to be part of that Sunday special. Publicly, they all complain because they get, complaints from other retailers, but privately they love participating because the amount of product they're able to sell in those Sunday specials.
Absolutely. I think something that jumped out at me right there that's a really interesting, maybe pattern that I'm seeing is that you responded really quickly and thoughtfully to a regulatory change, and you use that to become a leading business, in this case, on the day of Sunday. But, what I'm seeing now, which is, the way that we were first exposed to you, obviously we're in the cannabis industry. And when we started seeing you posting about all of the work you've been doing with Hemp Beverage at Top 10, that really jumped out at us because really you're one of the first people that I saw really building a public persona around being a business owner in a traditional industry that's really leaning into this, particularly in bev alc, which historically I think people have thought, oh, cannabis and bev alc are at odds. It's a zero-sum game and they're enemies with each other, as opposed to, you clearly jumping in and becoming a market leader. I'm just really curious to hear from your perspective, what got you over the hump of making that shift and starting to offer hemp beverages in your stores? And how did you think about that decision? And, how did you think about the opportunities versus the risks there when you were first deciding to do it?
Interesting question. It's not an overly complicated answer. In 2022, the Minnesota legislators snuck in language that made hemp-based THC legal to sell. And I think the Democrats did it. The Republicans didn't know what was happening, is at least the folklore story about it. And the industry was born. But at the time, liquor stores are only allowed to sell what the state explicitly says we can sell. So, for example, I can't sell cheese in my store because they don't say that we can. They had to go put in the statute that we could sell limes and lemons because regulators were coming in and saying, you can't sell those, it's not listed. So they had to go add it. So it's a very strict list of what we're able to do. And THC wasn't part of it. In 2023, when the legislators passed the cannabis bill making dispensaries legal, and they're finally opening up, and it's taken some time, but we're glad that they're finally opening. But they also made it explicitly legal for liquor stores to sell hemp-based THC beverages. And we would not neglect a category we're legally allowed to sell. We figured it would be a very positive category. We jumped into it immediately. I'd like to tell you that it was with a lot of thought and foresight and everything else. The reality is we just jumped into it and it immediately took off way beyond our expectations. And it's, to this day, we're still showing major growth year over year. And it's been a lot of fun to be part of that journey. And, as I mentioned, I look at us as an adult beverage store. I don't look at us as a liquor store. And I think they all belong well under the same umbrella. First of all, I think that there's absolutely no reason that THC shouldn't be legal, not just hemp THC, but all of cannabis. I think that it's a hypocritical position of the government where they are, and I think we all know that, and it just goes without saying. But we jumped on the opportunity to expand the assortment of what we have in our stores, and our I won't say all of our customers, but generally our customers have responded well. But those that have responded are very heavily engaged in the category and definitely see the benefits. And we as a retailer have made the decision that we're all in on the category. And I know from many years in the industry, when you jump on a category, you establish market share. And a lot of times you maintain that market share way beyond where you are if you're a latecomer to the game trying to build it back. And so I knew that if we jumped in with everything we could, we would establish a market share that hopefully we would never give up. And I can't honestly tell you if we're bigger or Total Wine is bigger today, but there's not many categories where it's a question about who's bigger. They're clearly bigger, not necessarily in this category. And so, it's fun to be able to be one of the leaders at the table helping drive it.
Super interesting. Yeah, it's still such a fraught topic, the idea of cannabis and THC and hemp THC products and legalization and consumption. And I'm wondering if you've noticed a evolution in the makeup of your customer base or even your employees, your team, in just like a cultural change in how they're consuming these products or, lifestyle differences. And, does the person who was walking through the front door, a top 10 5 years ago, look very different today versus it did then?
That's kind of an onion question that you got to unpeel some different pieces of it because you have a bunch of stuff going on. The first thing we have going on is that alcohol is in a modest state of decline. And, wine and craft beer are probably being impacted the most. Within spirits, there are some categories that are heavily impacted, but there's some other categories offsetting it. And, beer is a little bit of a mixed bag, but, overall, we're definitely seeing declines. And, there's a lot of discussion about why and what is driving those declines. And my personal perspective is that the GLP-1 drugs are the most significant reason why, because they reduce your desire for cravings, whether it's food or alcohol or whatever. And so they evolve people's interaction with the category. And, they say that over 10% of the population is in the category. So that's certainly having an impact. The economy, tariffs, that whole side of it is weighing as well. I frequently make this joke, but they mention tariffs. And even though they haven't hit a lot of the product we carry, the customers immediately think the product has gone up. I joke, about a whole bunch of things that people just don't understand or know. And that is the reality of it, is that people don't always pay attention and they act on news. They don't really understand the news. And so I do think the economy and the threat of tariffs has had impact. And then we hear a lot about young people or people in general drinking less. And I think as the THC category started in our stores, it coincided with GLP-1 drugs, with people drinking less, with the expense and everything attached to alcohol. And so it was just sort of the perfect timing for the category to come along. And, your soccer or hockey mom, we'd say in Minnesota, who used to have, her 2 or 3 glasses of Chardonnay with her girlfriends or whatever, started feeling like I'm waking up the next day and I got a headache. And instead, if I take one of these THC beverages and I sip at it and it's 5 milligrams of THC, I get a little buzz. So I feel like I'm getting something with my girlfriends, but I sleep well and I don't have a hangover the next day. And so I think we've seen that evolution within our customers. Has our customer base changed? And I don't know that I would say that it's overly changed. I think that, if you look at a basket today, most of the baskets with THC also have alcohol in them. There's a small percentage of our baskets that are THC only. And we have some people that come in specifically for THC without a doubt. But, by and large, it's our same customer base with a small element of people that are new to the store and new to the category. But the part that strikes me the most is with all the success we're having in the category, and I do think we're having a lot of success, 80% of our customer base is still not buying in the category. And so I actually feel that we're failing as an industry, because to have 80% of the people not entering the category and we don't have meaningful strategies to expand the audience, we're beginning to feel the plateau of the business until we're able to get over the hump of our customers in a broader sense supporting the category. And we'll get there, but the biggest thing we're working on as a retailer right now attached to the THC category is how to go after the 80% of people who are not yet in the category, because I've been out there and said that this is approaching 15% of our sales. We can't get it to 30, 40, 50% of our sales if we can't get it to 50, 60% of our customer base. So we really need to focus on the expansion of that audience as a major initiative for us and the industry.
Something that folks in cannabis who are on the very supportive side as it pertains to hemp. Obviously, there's some folks in regulated cannabis who feel that, the hemp beverage industry is maybe impinging on the dispensary's turf. But there are a lot of folks who feel, and I would count myself among them, that the normalization and the exposure that the overall market of consumers gets from these THC products being in more comfortable, more familiar environments of distribution is really important actually for getting that huge swath of people who aren't going into the dispensary to maybe experiment with additional THC products. Historically, beverage has been maybe 2 to 5% of dispensary sales volume. It's not a huge category. And so this actually seems like a really interesting entree. And I'm curious if you think there's maybe a similar process that might happen as we're seeing retailers like Target or restaurants like Applebee's start to sell hemp-based products. Do you think that, well, first of all, based on your history at Target, were you surprised when Target decided they were going to roll out, THC products? And second of all, do you think that's going to help to bring some of those consumers that you're talking about, that 80% into the fold?
Yeah, I think that the mainstreaming of the category is what's needed to get people to be comfortable with it. And I mean, first of all, where I think the cannabis industry has gotten it wrong for the extent that those that feel that it's an unfair advantage, it is a little bit unfair, I guess, in a sense that, you get 280E taxes, other things for cannabis and different legal structure, and that the hemp side of it kind of gets a pass on that. That's true. You can't argue that. The flip side of it is we are expanding the base of people who are cannabis friendly. And many of them may have been open to the category, but were not going to a dispensary. They looked at it. I mean, I think we all know that it's not the fault of the dispensary, but the dispensary experience is not enjoyable. You're carded, you feel like you're doing something wrong. You can't pay on credit card. You have to wait for one-on-one service. You can't just go make your own purchase. There's just all these things that go along with it that when you're done, you feel like you did something wrong more than you did something right. And that's not how it is for alcohol. I think that this is introducing people to the category in a very different way that weren't likely to be in it. And it's not my worry, but I think the 20% of our customers that are in the category are far more likely to go shop at a dispensary than many of them would have been before. And I'm happy for that experience because, if I asked you guys and you're part of the cannabis culture, my guess is you smoke it more than you eat edibles or drink beverages. It's just the nature of the industry. And we're not selling anything you can smoke. Everything we sell, you're going to eat or drink. And so for the person who really wants to go get something to smoke, flower, you have to go to a dispensary. And I'm okay with that. I think that's totally acceptable. It allows us to work together. And they're going to get people that make that one journey when it's legal and go in and buy something and they want it again, but they don't want to go to the dispensary, and that'll feed traffic back to us. So I think we go well together. I also truly believe, outside of the fact that we're going through a regulatory scare right now that we're all aware of, I think in the long run, the Delta 9 hemp side of the business is what's going to lead towards national legalization of cannabis, because you're going to have many states that have had this. I mean, a stepping stone. I don't know what that means, but we don't all go to heroin because we started with THC, and they're going to see that. And, I'm not a fan of the people that think they drive better high than they do not high. I don't like that side of it. We should all be complying with the law, but that, we're not destroying the roads. We're not, screwing up our jobs. We're all these different things that they predict are going to happen from cannabis or not. And they're going to see the benefit of taxing it and regulating it. And so I think eventually this will help lead to, national legalization of cannabis in a quicker way than had it not been there. So I think there's benefits up and down to the cannabis industry. When you look at the alcohol industry fighting hemp and cannabis, and then you look at the cannabis industry fighting hemp, I think we all need to get along and work together, and we're going to be far better off in the long run if we're all on the same page and not jealous about what the other one has that we don't and we want to get. We should get it the same way that I have to compete with Total Wine. I have to compete with them. I can't just go to the government and say, get rid of them. They're not good. They don't help me. I have to go out and compete. And alcohol is going to have to compete with cannabis, and cannabis is going to have to compete with hemp, and they're all going to compete. But that's healthy. And frankly, maybe outside of the New York City election, it is what our country was built on. And it's capitalism, not socialism, but that is who we are.
Sure. You touched on a few different paths forward there, right? We're obviously undergoing a lot of iteration and evolution in the kind of regulatory status. I'm curious about the kind of leadership implications there and how you talk to your team about it, frontline folks, and how they are educated to be speaking to consumers about the status of these products and what might be changing and what's not changing, as well as just how you incorporate that undeniable risk and kind of tenuous positioning to your team when you're opening stores 14, 15, 16, that I have to imagine is based and modeled on continued growth of this category.
For sure. A couple of things that I would say there. I mean, from a staff perspective, first of all, it's changing every minute. It's changing federally, which we're seeing, or hopefully not changing, but we know that something's coming. What, where, when, how, we're not sure. And then, it's not just Minnesota where we're located. It's every state. As they deal with this, they're dealing with how do they regulate it? What do they do? How do they manage it? And then you also get cities trying to put their stamp on it. And so like just this week, we had a city come out and say, we have new licensing that took effect November 1st. You have to have applied for an event. We're allowed to sell, but eventually we're going to be granted a license. And those are state issued licenses. And then cities, are supposed to approve it, but they don't really have any legal ability not to. It's just a rubber stamp type of thing. And all of a sudden cities are like, okay, but you can't do tastings, or you can sell beverages, but you can't sell edibles. And so we're also dealing with that side of it and having to manage our stores through. And, you get to some of these laws that the cities are doing that are not legal. And so then you're also, am I going to go sue the group that actually gives me my liquor license because they're not letting me do something in the cannabis environment? So there's a lot of complexity that comes with it. And I think our staff understands it's a new innovative category. We're learning about it. We're having to deal with the evolution within the category. We have to go with the flow and be legally compliant. Public education and legal compliance are crucial for long-term success. The education of both our staff and our customers is the most important thing to grow the category, because it's through that education they're comfortable understanding and willing to participate in the category. And the regulatory side of it, we make an effort to be leaders within the regulatory side of it. And I think that's important for us to do, and for anyone that's involved in the retail side of it, because it's the horror stories that will get us in trouble. It's the non-compliance that are going to get us in trouble. And it is complicated for the cannabis industry to look at regulation and want to be compliant, because it's an industry that was born being illegal, and over a time working their way into being legal. And now the legality is taking away a lot of the freedom and flexibility that the industry had when it was, gray or black market industry. But through that compliance comes a better path to being able to sell product to customers in a safe way and with the state's support. So it's, we choose leadership in the category. And I think our team understands that we're trying to be leaders and that we push the envelope as far as retail creativity, innovation, but we don't as far as selling product that's on the edge that might be out of compliance.
That makes a ton of sense, and it sounds like a great strategy, particularly, on the retail side. I'm curious what your perception is of the brand side of the hemp bev world. It does feel like to a lot of folks who have been in cannabis for a long time that this has been one of the most generative periods of brand creation in the industry. It feels like overnight hundreds of new THC beverage brands have popped up. Obviously, there already are existing industry leaders like Can or Uncle Arnie's or Keef Cola that are creating these extensions of their product line. But there are now so many new players in the market. How do you sort through the noise of this really explosive period of brand growth, and what do you look for to determine if a brand is, worthy of coming onto the top 10 shelf?
Anytime we get into merchandising, it's really my favorite part of the discussion because I think it's what I love doing. And it's the essence of any retailer is their merchandising philosophy. My first theory, I guess, is that unlike vodka, where Tito's is dominant, unlike tequila, where Casamigos or Patron or whatever are dominant, there is no THC brand today that matters. They all think they do. None of them matter. And it's a hard thing to say, but the reality is nobody's been able to build that brand identity in a material way. And it hurts and helps as a retailer having that be true. It creates a clean slate as far as how we create an assortment, which is a wonderful way as a merchant to create a category. You can work on, so we can talk about merchandising philosophies, but you can have philosophies and work towards those and make them successful. And that's a great thing to do. But when you don't have marquee brands that everybody walks in the store and knows, it's hard because you're working to create every one of these brands. And if you go talk to Can or you talk to Uncle Arnie's, like you mentioned, or Nowadays or Breeze, they all think they have tremendous brand recognition. And, Uncle Arnie's in our store today does. It's one of our top selling brands. It's done amazingly well. And within our store, it has recognition. But because this category is new and nobody has national marketing dollars and nobody has a path outside of, working Facebook or Instagram or whatever, there's not a lot of marketing that's gone into the category in a huge way to develop that. So it puts pressure on us as a retailer to build these brands. And so it's a clean slate, but it creates unique pressure. And, sort of from the merchandising philosophy side of it, there's not a roadmap of sales. Minnesota's sort of been at the forefront, and we push the envelope as far as brands we try and how we approach it. And, every single brand you talk to today, oh, we use quality ingredients. We use real fruit juice. We use the best emulsion available. Our packaging and branding is better than anyone. And if I had, $1 for every time I heard that, I wouldn't have to sell product. I could just retire from it. And so, what brands tell you doesn't necessarily help. So a lot of it is just good old fashioned merchandising where you bring in products and you try them and you look at what's working and how you build out an assortment to, what are the shifts? We all started heavy in seltzers, even though people were losing interest in seltzers. And then we sort of went from there to the can of cocktails, and now it's really flavor forward is what people are looking for, and certainly unique form factors, whether it's the shots, which are, the best bang for the buck as far as if you're just doing it to get high or trying to do something easy to get to sleep, to the powders and, the snaps and all that type of stuff. There's a lot of fun, creative things. I don't remember which of you said it, but one of you made the comment about the proliferation of items, and there's so many. Have you ever walked in a wine store and seen how many cabs they have?
True.
how many Sauv Blancs they've had, how many different vodkas they've had. It's what we do as retail. And it's how it is. And it's part of the growth of the category. At the beginning of this year, we probably had about 24 feet dedicated to the category. Our goal by mid next year is to probably be as large as 96 feet dedicated to the category. And we're probably sort of halfway in between those two now. And, do we have the business to support that growth? We have a lot of business, but we're expanding it faster because I think it's important to reach that full penetration of the category so that customers are able to really see what it could be. But the most fascinating part of it to me, it may be disappointing, is brands now are looking to us and asking us how we're going to grow their brands in our store. And as a retailer, it's a fascinating question because my job is to bring in customers and their job is to put product on my shelf that will sell and to help market it to the customers. And so a lot of brands, I think, in this industry uniquely are confused about how to grow their brands. And I think probably the biggest reason is, oh, we're in 32 states. Okay, but how many are you doing well in? Wouldn't you be better off to be in 10 states and hitting out of the park and then add 11 and slowly add number 12? But instead, there's this rush to be the first brand to sell for $1 billion or whatever it is. And so they're trying to do this mass expansion to collect as many states as they can. And what they're forgetting is if they're not selling where they are and they're just spreading their product out to a lot of different states, they're not going to be successful in the long run. And so I think the industry is a little twisted right now as far as their expectations on how to grow the industry and what to do. And as a buyer and somebody who spends a ton of time on product, maybe more than anyone else, or as much as anyone else, I shouldn't say more than anyone else, but brands need to take ownership for their brands and understand that's what it means. And, we hear things like liquid to lips, which is crucially important. We can talk about that if you want. But the other thing is they have to own the success of their brand at retail and they need to take ownership for it and make sure they're taking the proper steps for success. The win is not getting into my assortment. The win is a year from now getting constant reorders from me because you've succeeded in building the brand. And they might get it, I'm not sure, but it doesn't always show.
I guess what are the levers at their disposal, right? I guess I don't have a great grasp on some of the Minnesota specific regulations on hemp THC, but of course the cannabis industry is totally handcuffed when it comes to kind of traditional marketing channels. What is available to some of these brand partners that you think they really need to be doubling down on?
Well, I mean, number one, and I think we know this, is tastings, frequent tastings to allow customers to taste the product. And live tastings as opposed to non-dose tasting or dosed as opposed to non-dose tastings are crucially important to me at least, because even though you're just taking, I was looking for a little shot glass, but even though you're just taking a little shot of it, not enough to get you high or worry or whatever, when you see that the well-made, and most of them are pretty well-made today, but the well-made beverages, you're not drinking bong water unless you wanted to. You're drinking a flavorful beverage where you really don't taste the THC at all. And I think that surprises a lot of people because, we've all become to experience. We all know that's not the expectation anymore. But for the customer coming in, trying it for the first time, I think in their minds they're going to be tasting bong water and they're surprised to see they aren't. But when it's a non-dose sample, they don't get that experience. So I think the dose sampling is really an important part of it. And the other thing is you may do 2 or 3 tastings and maybe you get a very minimal amount of THC from that. And you realize you're not passing out, you're not dying, you're not, hallucinating. I mean, you're having a normal experience and it's not impacting you. Also makes people more comfortable with the category. So, tastings is very important. Education is equally important to tastings. You have to be focused on educating our staff to understand your brand, the features of your brand, what it does. You have to be working to educate within our 4 walls or our ad structure, your customers about your brand, because we all forget because we live it day in and day out. We know this stuff, But when you talk about CBD, CBN, all these different things, THC, Delta 9, even the flavor profiles, most people don't know the lingo that we use. And so if we're not working to educate people on it, in their minds, I don't know what it is. I'm not trying something I don't know. I don't know. Is it safe? Is it legal? Whatever else. So that education side of it, really, along with tastings, are probably the two most important. Where you are on the shelf, I shouldn't say this because now I'm going to get a million calls when people listen to this, but where you are on the shelf or in the cooler matters. The promotional schedule that we do, being in our ads, we do features that allow brands to tell their story in a more material way to help people understand. All of those things matter to build the category. And then, you get the way brands have been able to navigate social media, geofencing, things like that to drive the business. And that part is really important. I would talk about direct to consumer because I know a lot of brands, I think Breeze sets the bar as far as it, have created their brands that way. In Minnesota, it is illegal to ship product direct to consumers. I hope brands aren't doing it. Again, I'm always going to fight for compliance. I'm not saying that I made the rule. I don't like the rule, but once the rule is there, I think it's important we as an industry are compliant, because if Minnesota sees that some brand ignores it and keeps shipping it in, maybe they get tired of the category altogether and they're like, enough, we can't control this. We're just going to outlaw it completely. And we don't want that to happen. So, regulatory compliance is important. But I think a lot of these elements go into successfully building it. But, in Minnesota, we're only allowed to market to 21 and older audiences. And it's limiting and it sounds limiting, but like, for example, we're looking at influencers, personalities, and media channels that will allow us to direct advertise to customers that are 21 and older, because we need to, and we need brands to work with us to support this. We need to get to the 80% of customers in our stores and outside of our stores that are not in the category. And if you are afraid of the category, I can put it on ad all the time. It's not going to change your mind. If you had a bad experience with a gummy in Las Vegas when you went there and you don't want to have a bad experience, there's a lot of reasons you might have, and we can help you through that. But we have to market to you to get you to come in and have that dialogue. I can speak one-on-one with anyone and tell my story. My story impacts everyone I tell as to why I am part of the category. It helps me sleep. I wasn't a good sleeper. I could track my sleep. I was afraid of the gummies. I was afraid of the category because I had many bad experiences that I laid awake all night in Vegas from THC that freaked me out or whatever. And one day I'm like, okay, I'm going to try one of these gummies. All the time I'm selling them and whatever. I got to try it. And I track my sleep, and all of a sudden I realize, I can't believe this. I'm sleeping like 7 hours a night. I'm getting REM sleep. I'm waking up rested the next day. But we need marketing to tell that story and stories like it to people so that they understand you can do this in a great way to get high. And it's a lot of fun. And every once in a while, I even like a lunch of tequila and some weed, because it sort of propels it to the next level. And if you're ready, it's a fun experience. But that's not why most people are getting into the category. And we need to help them understand the other benefits and features that the category has, whether it's not being hungover, socializing and feeling like you're engaging, but not having alcohol because of whatever reason you don't want to, sleep, energy, focus, all these different things that come along with it. But that message only gets out through dedicated marketing to customers. And that's, that ultimately is how we need to drive to that 80%. And that's how we're going to get to be a $50 billion category, is through heavy marketing to the audience, to expand the audience so that people understand the benefits of what we're trying to do.
Incredible. Well said. I think that's a great place for us to wrap. I know we're right up against time here. Reading you out here, Jon Halper is proof that even in a regulated old school industry, there's still room for creativity, humanity, and a little bit of risk. From reinventing liquor retail through top 10 liquors to championing THC beverages before anyone else, he's built a playbook for how independent brands can innovate and scale without losing their souls. You can find Jon on LinkedIn, where he shares insights on leadership, retail, and the evolving world of beverages and cannabis. We're all watching and rooting for you, Jon, whatever comes next for you in Top 10. Thanks for showing us what high touch looks like in action.
Thank you, guys. Great seeing you. Take care.